The perfect day shattered. Emma Sinclair stood before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite, her ivory silk gown catching the afternoon light. The delicate lace sleeves, hand-sewn by her grandmother, felt like a blessing from the past. Pearl buttons lined the back, each one fastened with trembling fingers by her mother just an hour earlier. At 22, Emma believed in fairy tale endings. She had met James Patterson during her sophomore year at college, and their romance had bloomed like spring flowers. When he proposed on the beach where they first kissed, Emma felt her real life was finally beginning. 8 months of careful planning had led to this moment. Every detail reflected their shared dreams. From the white roses symbolizing pure love to the vintage champagne that would toast their future. Emma's parents had spent their life savings to give their only daughter the wedding she deserved. The chapel bells chimed in the distance as nearly 200 guests gathered at Rosewood Manor. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock. When the autumn sun would cast golden light through the stained glass windows, Emma's bridesmaids, led by her best friend Victoria Cross, had already taken their places. The string quartet played soft melodies while guests whispered about how beautiful Emma looked and how lucky James was. But as the clock struck 4, then 5 minutes passed, then 10, nervous energy rippled through the crowd. Emma waited behind the chapel doors, her bouquet of white peonies growing heavy in her shaking hands. Her father paced beside her, checking his watch and muttering about punctuality. Victoria appeared at the doors, her emerald bridesmaid dress rustling. But instead of a reassuring smile, Victoria's face was pale and drawn. Her eyes, usually bright with mischief, now held something that looked like guilt. "Emma, we need to talk," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of confused guests. Before Emma could respond, the chapel doors swung open. James walked in, but not as Emma had imagined 1,000 times. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his face carried the weight of someone about to destroy everything precious. The chapel fell silent as James approached the altar. Instead of taking his place beside the minister, he turned to face the congregation. His voice cracked as he spoke, but his words carried clearly to every corner of the sacred space. "I cannot do this," he announced, his hands trembling as he gripped the altar rail. "I cannot marry Emma because I am in love with someone else. I have been unfaithful, and that someone is carrying my child." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Emma felt the world spin as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Her bouquet fell from nerveless fingers, white peonies scattering across the marble floor like fallen snow. Victoria stepped forward, her hand resting. On her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Emma. We never meant for this to happen." The chapel erupted in chaos. And Emma's perfect day crumbled into dust. The stranger's intervention, what happened next, would haunt Emma for months. Instead of respectful silence or sympathy, cruel laughter began bubbling up from different sections of the congregation. Someone in the back row actually applauded, as if watching entertainment, rather than witnessing a young woman's heart being shattered in public. "Did you see this coming?" One guest whispered loudly. "I always thought she was too good to be true." "Poor little Emma," another voice added with false sympathy. "She always was too naive for her own good." The worst part was the phones. Everywhere Emma looked, she saw people recording, their screens glowing like hungry eyes capturing her humiliation. She knew that within hours, videos of her being abandoned at the altar would be shared across social media, turning her private pain into public entertainment. Emma tried to speak, to defend herself or maintain some dignity, but no words came. Her throat felt closed, her breath coming in short gasps as panic set in. The beautiful chapel that had seemed so welcoming now felt like a prison, its walls closing in as cruel laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Just as Emma thought she might collapse, a commanding voice cut through the chaos like a sword through. "Silk, that is enough." The chapel fell silent as every head turned. A man stood in the back row, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored black suit. His presence seemed to fill the entire space, and even those who had been laughing moments before now stared at him with something approaching fear. Adrian Blackstone was not a man who attended many weddings, but he had been invited through a business connection to Emma's father. At 35, he had built a financial empire that spanned 3 continents. His name was whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of respect and wariness. This young woman deserves better than to be a spectacle. For your entertainment, Adrian continued, his voice carrying absolute authority. Anyone who finds amusement in another person's pain is not worthy of being in the same room as her. He began walking down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Guests shrank back as he passed, suddenly ashamed of their behavior. Even James seemed to shrink under Adrian's withering gaze. When Adrian reached Emma, she was standing frozen like a statue, tears streaming down her cheeks. She made no sound, as if her voice had been stolen along with her dignity. "Miss Sinclair," Adrian said gently, his voice completely different from the commanding tone he had used moments before. "You do not need to endure this circus any longer." He removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders, the expensive fabric warm from his body heat. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He knelt down and carefully gathered the scattered peonies from the floor, creating a small bouquet that he placed in her hands. "These are still beautiful," he said softly, looking directly into her eyes. "Just like you." The sanctuary Emma found her voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand. Why are you helping me?" "Because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity," Adrian replied, standing and offering her his arm. "And because I believe you are meant for far greater things than this." Together, they walked down the aisle that Emma had dreamed of walking as a bride. But instead of moving toward a future with James, she was walking away from a past that had crumbled around her. The guests watched in amazement as Adrian escorted her out of the chapel, his protective presence shielding her from their stares. Outside, a sleek black car waited. Adrian's driver, a distinguished man named Thomas, held the door open with practiced discretion. Emma hesitated, suddenly realizing that accepting this man's help meant stepping into a world completely unknown. To her, "Where will you take me?" she asked, her voice still shaky. "Somewhere safe," Adrian replied. "Somewhere you can decide what you want to do next without the pressure of cameras or cruel voices." The Blackstone mansion rose from the hillside like something from a dream. Its Georgian architecture commanded respect while somehow maintaining an air of warmth. As the car wound up the circular driveway, Emma pressed her face to the window, amazed by the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched endlessly. Fountains sparkled in the evening light, and ancient oak trees formed natural archways over winding paths. "This is your home?" Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder despite her exhaustion. Adrian nodded, watching her reaction carefully. "Has been my sanctuary for many years. Tonight, I hope it can be yours as well." Inside, Emma found herself in a world beyond anything she had ever imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on walls lined with original paintings, while Persian rugs covered floors of polished hardwood. The air smelled of lavender and old books, creating an atmosphere of comfort and sophistication. Mrs. Helena Ashworth, the head housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by magic. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had spent her life caring for others. The blue guest. "Suite has been prepared," Mrs. Ashworth said to Adrian, then turned to Emma with a gentle smile. "There are fresh clothes in your size, my dear, and a warm bath waiting. Take all the time you need." Emma looked down at her wedding dress, now wrinkled and stained with tears. The beautiful gown that had represented all her hopes and dreams now felt like a costume from a play that had ended badly. The guest suite was larger than Emma's entire apartment back home. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens, while a fireplace crackled warmly in the sitting area. On the bed lay a selection of comfortable clothes in her exact size, along with everything she might need for the night. For 3 days, Emma barely left her room. She slept deeply for the first time in months, as if her body was finally allowing itself to rest after the trauma. Mrs. Ashworth brought meals on silver trays, never staying long enough to intrude, but always offering warm smiles and gentle encouragement. Adrian respected her need for solitude completely. He left books outside her door and sometimes fresh flowers or perfectly brewed tea. small gestures that reminded her she was not alone, without pressuring her to interact before she was ready. The transformation on the fourth morning, Emma finally ventured downstairs. She found Adrian in his study, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. He was reading a leather-bound volume, his dark hair catching the morning light. When he saw her, he closed the book immediately and stood, with natural courtesy. "Good morning, Emma. I hope you slept well." She nodded, suddenly feeling shy in her borrowed clothes. Mrs. Ashworth had provided her with a simple but elegant dress in soft blue. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness. I know I've been poor company." "Healing takes time," Adrian replied gently. "There is no timeline for recovering from betrayal." Over the following weeks, Emma began to learn about the man who had rescued her. Adrian Blackstone was not just wealthy. He was a financial genius who had built his empire through careful planning and an almost supernatural ability to predict market trends. But beneath his success lay a more complex story. He had grown up in foster care after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. The system had been cruel to a sensitive boy who loved books more than sports, and he had learned early that the only person he could truly depend on was himself. "Money isn't about luxury," he explained to Emma one evening as they walked through his gardens. "It's about freedom. Freedom to help others, to make choices based on what is right rather than what is necessary for survival." Emma began to understand that Adrian's mansion was not just a home, but a fortress he had built against a world that had once left him vulnerable and alone. Yet despite his wealth and power, she sensed a loneliness in him that mirrored her own. As autumn turned to winter, Emma found herself changing in ways she had never expected. Away from the judgment and expectations of her old life, she began to discover parts of herself that had been buried under years of trying to be the perfect girlfriend, ideal daughter. She started reading voraciously from Adrian's extensive library, diving into philosophy, art history, and biographies of remarkable women throughout history. She learned French from Mrs. Ashworth, who had spent her youth in Paris, and discovered she had a natural talent for languages. Most surprisingly, she found herself drawn to business and finance, asking Adrian endless questions about his work and the principles that guided his decisions. "You have an intuitive understanding of human nature," Adrian observed one day after Emma had correctly predicted how a rival company would respond to his latest acquisition. "That is the most valuable skill in business. Numbers can be calculated, but people must be understood." Emma felt a flush of pride at his words. For the first time in her life, someone was recognizing her intelligence rather than just her kindness or beauty. She began to see herself differently, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman with untapped potential. Just before Christmas, Emma received an unexpected visitor. Victoria Cross appeared at the mansion's front door, visibly pregnant now and looking haggard despite her expensive clothes. Mrs. Ashworth announced her arrival with obvious disapproval. But Emma agreed to see her former friend in the formal living room.
Ma.
"You look incredible," Victoria said, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and envy. "This place is like a palace. What do you want, Victoria?" Emma asked, her voice calm but distant. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "I wanted to explain, to make you understand that we never meant to hurt you. James and I, we tried to fight it, but love just happened." Emma studied her former friend's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly. "And how is that working out for you?" The new beginning. Victoria's face crumpled. "Terrible. James is already cheating on me. He says the baby was a mistake, that he's not ready for responsibility. I'm alone, Emma. I lost my job, my reputation, everything. I thought maybe you could help me put in a good word with your billionaire friend." Emma felt a surge of pity, but also a clarity she had never experienced before. "I'm not going to help you, Victoria, not because I'm cruel, but because you need to learn to stand on your own feet, just like I had to. But we were best friends." "Best friends don't betray each other at the altar," Emma replied firmly. "I forgive you, Victoria, but I won't enable you. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." After Victoria left, Emma found Adrian in his study. He looked up from his papers as she entered, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "I heard voices," he said quietly. "Was that difficult?" "Less than I expected," Emma admitted, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I think I'm finally ready to move forward." Adrian set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "What does moving forward look like for you?" Emma had been thinking about this question for weeks. "I want to go back to school. Business." "School? I want to learn everything I can about finance, about building something meaningful. I want to work with you if you'll have me." A slow smile spread across Adrian's face. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been watching you these past months, Emma. You have natural instincts that can't be taught. You see people clearly, understand their motivations. That's invaluable in business." "There's something else," Emma said, her heart racing. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Adrian stood and walked around the desk, taking her hands in his. "I know I'm falling in love with you. I have been since the moment I saw you standing there in that chapel, refusing to let them break you. Even covered in tears and humiliation? Especially then. You were magnificent in your dignity, Emma. You still are." He kissed her then, soft and gentle. Nothing like the desperate passion she had once mistaken for love with James. This was something deeper, built on respect and understanding. 2 years later, Emma stood in the same chapel at Rosewood Manor, but this time she was truly ready. She had graduated summa cum laude from business school and was now Adrian's business partner, as well as his wife. The woman who had once been humiliated in this very place was now a respected entrepreneur in her own right. The guest list was smaller this time. It was filled only with people who truly cared about them. Mrs. Ashworth sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Emma's parents, who had initially been skeptical of Adrian's motives, now considered him the son they had always wanted. As Adrian took her hand at the altar, Emma thought about the journey that had brought them here. Sometimes the worst moments in life were actually doorways to something better. Her humiliation had been the catalyst for discovering her true strength, and her broken heart had led her to a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. "Do you, Emma Sinclair, take Adrian Blackstone to be your husband?" "I do," Emma said, her voice clear and strong. When they kissed, the chapel erupted in genuine applause. But this time, the phones recording the moment were held by friends who wanted to capture joy, not exploit pain. Aside, instead of throwing rice, guests released white doves that soared into the sunset sky. Emma watched them fly away and thought about second chances, about the strange ways life could surprise you when you least expected it. Adrian squeezed her hand. "Ready for the adventure, Mrs. Blackstone," Emma smiled, feeling truly ready for anything life might bring. "Let's go build our empire." And they did. If you like this video, if the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.